This episode is brought to you by Zillow. You've probably spent hours Zillowing on Zillow, scrolling through beach houses, looking up the Zestimate of your boss's house. But Zillow is so much more than searching for homes. Now, Zillowing means finding a top agent who's with you all the way, working with a top-rated loan officer to find a mortgage with Zillow Home Loans, and getting into the home of your dreams, whether it's on a beach or not. Zillow, let's get you home. Download the Zillow app today. Zillow Home Loans, NMLS number 10287.
Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report. Wherever you get your podcasts, you're watching on YouTube, do me a big favor, hit that like button and hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Empire Media. That's AMPIRE. Always much appreciated when you tune in. Don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. I have a story up now on the site about the early impact of new offense coordinator / assistant head coach Eric Bieniemy. Don't know what it's going to look like during the season, but I know there was a big impact this spring and what players had to say about it, what Ron Rivera had to say about it, but also just some observations and just things you kind of pick up along the way. By the way, I did have a longer interview with Ron Rivera about Bieniemy's impact. I'm going to play that next week. It's an audio interview, so just stay tuned for that, and I'll have a little introduction before that as well and talk about some things going on. Anyway, so that'll probably run next week or so. Don't forget, I'm also going to go down to 2 podcasts a week until we get really close to training camp. So today, I have the first of a 2-part conversation with former Washington tight end Logan Paulsen. Today, we discuss the quarterback, Sam Howell, of course, and the entire offense, what Logan thinks, where he thinks this offense is at after the spring, and as we inch closer to training camp, his opinion or his impressions of Eric Bieniemy so far, what he likes, what he has seen from this offense. Is he optimistic? All that good stuff. Then on Thursday, I'll run part 2 of my conversation with Logan when we discuss the defense. So stay tuned for that later this week. Now, before I get to my conversation with Logan, just a couple things. Let's start with the fact that, and you know this by now, but just in case you've been sleeping under a rock and you didn't know it, the NFL did set a date for a special session with the other owners to discuss / likely vote on the sale of the Commanders from the Snyders to the Josh Harris Group. The Finance Committee still has to recommend approval to the other owners for the sale before the owners can vote on it, but it's anticipated that will be coming soon as well. And I've said this before, but we do expect the Mary Jo White report, or at least we were told that there's a good chance the Mary Jo White report could be released before the sale goes through, so they could kind of wipe everything out and then start fresh with training camp the following week. The camp opens on the 26th. The sale goes through on the 20th. Good chance that there will be a press conference in D.C. with Josh Harris on the 21st. And then again, you get the weekend to talk about that. And then you move forward to training camp the following week. Would be create quite a buzz, I think, for this franchise if they're able to pull that one off and get this over and everything done, get the Mary Jo White report out before that point as well. Move on from that era and look forward to the new era. Speaking of which, with the new era, and again, I've told you this, so just wanted to be clear on this. The top priorities for this new ownership group would be stadium, evaluating what they have as far as like the Jason Wrights of the world, the business side, and of course on the football side, it would be an ongoing thing. I think every indication I've gotten is that they're going to take the season and kind of really evaluate what they have, be very patient with things, but looking for a stadium will be a massive top priority. The one thing that won't be a top priority is changing the name. Now, and I've told you that before. Now, does that mean they would never do that? That they would never look into that? No, I can't say that. So I think but every time I've said this, it's more, is it a top priority? No. And you can argue that it should be. It's not for them. So it doesn't matter. And, but would it be down the road? I can't rule that out. And I know that Harris would be asked about it at his press conference. I'm sure he'll be asked about it because I know a lot of you want to know about that. My guess is he'll just kind of say, hey, that's not something we're going to take on right now, and just kind of kick it down the road a little bit. But, I think if it's something where they say after a year or two that that they feel like it remains a big problem, then of course I think they would look at it because you'd have to. The problem that I think, and I've heard from people in the group too, that you'd have is there really a name that's going to satisfy everybody? So is it worth going through all the process of changing it, or is it just better off to build a really good franchise and just figure that they're going to embrace it at some point? I don't know. That's all for down the road. But again, not a top priority, but I would not dismiss if down the road they still think it's a problem that, I'm not going to say they would never take it on because I don't know that for sure. Anyway, just wanted to go over that. And then the last thing is, for some reason, I've been seeing a couple things on Twitter about Nick Gates has won the starting center job. I didn't know that was really in question because when they signed him, he was signed here to be their starting center. They drafted Ricky Stromberg to provide a lot of depth and insurance at center, but he was not drafted to necessarily come right in and compete to start. They paid Gates to start at center. So it wasn't like, when you're watching the spring, it's like, oh, is this a competition? I never viewed it that way. He's always been the guy who's going to start. Now, could Stromberg eventually push him? If Gates doesn't play well or if he gets hurt, then it opens the door for Stromberg. But they really like Gates, and I think the other players like him. So, but yeah, it's funny because I'd seen a couple things on that, and whether from fans or whatever, and just a little bit surprising because I didn't realize that was in question for a lot of people. So just know the starting center is going to be Nick Gates, barring something unforeseen. Anyway, that's it. Enough for me. Let's get to my conversation about the Commanders offense, looking at where Logan Paulsen felt they were after the spring and looking ahead to the summer and the season.
This episode is brought to you by Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, arriving in theaters this Friday. In this franchise's final installment, the most iconic adventurer of all time comes out of retirement to search for a legendary device with the power to change history. Harrison Ford returns alongside Phoebe Waller-Bridge and Mads Mikkelsen. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, only in theaters this Friday. Tickets are on sale now.
This episode is brought to you by La Quinta by Wyndham. Wherever your work takes you, you know it's going to be a good time because you're staying at La Quinta by Wyndham. They have free breakfast, fully equipped gyms, and free high-speed Wi-Fi to help you take care of any last-minute business or help keep you in the know on all things sports. Tonight, La Quinta. Tomorrow, you triumph. Book your stay today at lq.com.
School is out and summer is here, so it's time to plan your next family adventure. With 8 different levels, 16 courses, 250 climbing obstacles, and over 4,000 feet of zip lines, the Adventure Park at Sandy Spring, located in Montgomery County, Maryland, is the largest ropes course and zip line park in the country. Beat the heat and join us after dark for some night climbing. When the sun goes down, the park is lit up, allowing you to climb under the stars. Check out their Glow in the Park events for extra glow lights and music throughout the forest. Want to keep your feet on the ground? Grab a bite to eat from the food truck and give axe throwing a try. Perfect for first-timers or experts, their projector systems allow you to throw at traditional targets, play tic-tac-toe, Connect Four, or even hunt zombies. Listeners of this show can get $5 off any ticket by entering the code KEIM23DC at checkout. That's promo code KEIM23DC, KEIM23DC. Now open 7 days a week, this is the perfect time of year to get outside and join the adventure at theadventurepark.com. Logan, as always, I'm very happy to have you on. Always one of the smartest discussions on this podcast. So let's start with, I wrote a story recently about the early impact of Eric Bieniemy. What do you see? And we talked about this off air a couple of days ago, but what do you see as the biggest impact he's made just from your ability to watch practices, watch, the iPad and watch it on the field? What's been the biggest impact you think he's made so far?
Well, I mean, obviously there's like the X's and O's. It's a new offense. It's a West Coast offense, West Coast terminology, which the players have talked about. There's a level of detail kind of attacking, in that 3 to 5 step area. But, offense is offense. And I think the thing that makes an offense come to life is how the coordinator and how the coaches communicate that. And, we were talking the other day about how important it is to have a detailed perspective when coaching an offense. And I think EB, the thing that when you watch practice, when you listen to practice, when you watch how he interacts with the players, he has a very clear vision, and he is good at expressing that kind of high level detail to the players. And I think that that's something that, not to knock anybody that's been here before, but something that he's bringing that I think is going to really help every position, help, the receivers, help the tight ends, help the running backs, help the quarterback. And especially with a young quarterback, I think that level of detail is super important, because I find that quarterbacks, unless they're a veteran, unless they're super experienced, unless you're giving them good structure, they can get a little bit lost. Like, defenses now are so complex, right? They run, all this, like, it's not, middle open, so your cover twos, your quarters, middle field closed, cover three, man concepts with the post safety. It's not that clear anymore. Defenses understand that's how quarterbacks work. And so when you can give the quarterback a structure and kind of a safety net in those situations, I think it leads to better quarterback play. So I think the level of detail EB's brought, in addition to the difference in scheme, are the biggest things I've seen, when watching practice.
Because one of the questions I'd had, and what I asked you the other day, was like, okay, they've changed up the way they practice. They changed up the structure of practice and all that, which is all fine and good, and it's different, but the rationale is like, was that part of the impact? But it really does seem to be more about the details of the position, or the position, more so than the changes in the structure of it. Or do you think that they're kind of all tied together?
Well, to say that the change in structure is insignificant, I think is overstating. But if I was going to prioritize one, I definitely think it's the level of detail and the passion that EB is bringing to the offense. Because, I've been a part of a multitude of different offenses. I think I played in 4 of them when I was in college. I played in, probably 5 or 6 of them when I was in the NFL, all a little bit different, all a little bit different emphasis. But the thing that kind of sticks out is the concepts are the same. The thing that makes those concepts work, that makes the run scheme work, that makes the drop back work, make the play pass work, is the details, and understanding how the concept you're installing is designed to attack certain styles of defense. So when I look at EB and this offense, I definitely think there's a clear vision of what's happening, and a clear line of communication, and a clear standard. And so, like, I know people want to talk about the change in defensive practice structure. They're not running the football a whole bunch. It's all 7-on-7. It's all team pass. It's, it's not kind of traditional offseason work. That is significant, but I do think the thing that's more significant is the passion and the energy and the focus that EB is bringing, because I think that's the thing that's going to pay long-term dividends for this team.
How much do players latch on to that aspect versus change in scheme?
That's a good question. I think, we've talked, I think I've mentioned this to you before on this podcast, like, there is when the coordinator is passionate and the coordinator has a belief in what they're doing, and it's very clear what the coordinator sees, it gives the player confidence in what the coordinator is saying. It gives the player confidence in scheme, because ultimately, like, you need to get buy-in from the players, right? If you could have the best scheme in the world on paper, right? But if you can't communicate it, and you can't get your Jimmys and Joes to buy into that, it's not going to go anywhere for you. Like, it needs to come alive, and you need to impassion those players to say, oh, I believe that when I run this dig, the way he coached me to run it, at the depth he coached me to run it, in the timing he coached me to run it, versus this coverage, I will be open and I will get the ball. And when you can do that, like, one of the, last year you heard a couple times, like, guys saying, oh, like, the offense doesn't get me open, or what, whatever it was, like, they just lost confidence in the scheme. Like, the route combinations, like I've talked about with you, I know, they're not bad concepts, the ones they were running last year. It's just they weren't coached in a way that allowed the players to be successful, which, again, just disenfranchises the player. And a disenfranchised player is not an effective football player. So I look at what EB's doing, and again, it's a long way to go, but in terms of building confidence in an offense and being detailed on the offense, I think he's putting these guys in a good position to be successful. And I think he's building an impassioned group, which is important.
One of the things they get asked a lot too is about the difference in styles between the two systems.
Yeah.
And, there's a generalistic version of that, but what's your take on the difference in styles between the two?
Between
what they ran under Scott and what they're going to run under Eric. And I know West Coast, Eric Coryell concepts are similar. It does seem like in this one, you want a little bit, maybe more of the quick three-step drops, those kind of things to get the playmakers the ball in space a little bit quicker, that kind of thing. But from your perspective.
Yeah, I actually did a project for Command Center on this about the difference between the Eric Coryell and the West Coast offense. And one of the things that I think, there's been a lot of cross-pollination. There's a lot of similarities between the two. But the biggest similarity, you hear this thrown around a lot, and hopefully we can explain it a little bit, is Eric Coryell demands vertical separation. They try to challenge the defense vertically. And as the defense abides by these vertical concepts, it creates space underneath. So I think like last year you heard Scott and some of his assistants say, we're reading deep to short. Right. The idea being is you check the deep concept, the defense respects that, and it opens up the 10, 15-yard dig behind it. You can complete the football there.
Love that dig in the Air Coryell.
Yeah. Yeah. And those concepts are extremely effective. They're very, very effective. The timing is awesome. It's great, right? I think the difference is when you compare last year's offense to a guy like Kyle or a traditional West Coast offense, which Kyle is. He's a West Coast disciple, is there's a huge emphasis on stretching the defense horizontally. And so I'm not so much worried about the vertical passing game. I'm worried about creating good throwing windows for the quarterback by demanding that the defense expand 53 yards to accommodate my passing concept. And so Kyle does that in a couple different ways. He runs the football. He demands that you stretch with the run to the right. He throws back to the left. He makes sure that the backs are really working for width on those flare routes and those wheels and those flats to make sure that the linebackers stretch out so he can hit those kind of around the hash throws. And so, the other thing that sticks out to me is that the West Coast offense is designed to accommodate lack of personnel. And what I mean by that is your quarterback does not need to have the strongest arm. You don't need to have the best offensive line because the ball is in and out of the quarterback's hand quickly, and we're not pushing the ball down the field. Eric Coryell, you need some pieces around you to make that go, right? Vertical passing attack, you need a big receiver who can make 50-50 contested catches, right? You need an excellent offensive line to hold up in those 5 and 7 step drops that are just straight drop back because you're going to run a lot of gap scheme runs. Gap scheme runs, play actions traditionally aren't as effective as outside zone play actions. So you got to make sure you can accommodate that. So I think that, to me, those are some of the biggest differences is the horizontal stretch, which you see in practice almost every single day. He's stretching the defense this way to create those throwing lanes. And again, you're going to get less stress on the offensive line in this system, going to get less stretch long-term on the quarterback, I think. So all of these things, I think, bode well. You lose some of the high-end upside big playability, no doubt. But I think you get a more consistent offense and an offense that, again, it's not leveraging your skill position players and your offensive line the way that the Eric Coryell traditionally does. And at times Scott did last year.
And that's why when people ask about the line, I'm like, we have to see how the scheme is going to impact it, because we can look at the names on paper, but you have to see how the scheme is going to impact their effectiveness because of that. And that's one of the things that I heard early on is that the 3-step drops and that style should help them to play action, the screens, and limiting, maybe kind of slowing the pass rush through different means.
Yeah, absolutely. And, this during this OTA period, it's been well reported that it was predominantly pass, right? But I have conversations with some of the edge rushers and they're like, it's still even hard in these situations because of the splits that they're in, the formations that they get in, the motions that they use to kind of say, is this guy going to chip me? Is this guy a screen candidate? Even that, just kind of giving the rushers pause and concern in those situations is very, very valuable. And we're not even running the football. We're not running a lot of play action. We're not doing all these things that, again, are used to mitigate rushes. We haven't even talked about the screen game. There are tools, and I go back again, like I watched the first the Super Bowl game, Kansas City versus Philadelphia. Obviously, EB was part of that staff, and they understand not to leverage the offensive line. Like when you watch like the first 15 plays or so, I think there's 2 two true dropbacks.
Right.
And what I mean by that, they were throwing the ball, but one's off a quick game, one's off an RPO, one's off a play action, one's a screen. And then on our first and 10 in the red zone, we have a drop back. So the rusher is a little bit confused. He's like, can I actually rush in this situation? It's on first down. They're not expecting a drop back pass in that situation. And it allows Wiley and the rest of those offensive linemen to perform at a very high level. You're not leveraging them down in and down out the way you do in a traditional, Eric Coryell West Coast offense, which is, it's a lot more 5 and 7 step drop backs that really stresses those guys out. So I do think that, while on paper this group is still a big question mark, the offensive line, I really believe that the scheme is going to elevate them to a certain extent. Now, are they going to be the best offensive line in football? It seems unlikely, but I do think they're going to be better than kind of the sum of their parts, which was a big character, some of the best offenses that I played for under Kyle and Sean. And one of the reasons they were able to do that is because you're able to say, let's understand that in terms of football, offensive line is the hardest thing you're going to do outside of playing quarterback, right? Maybe DB, because you're dealing with the best athletes all the time. Let's give them easier reps there. And I think that's what Eric under Andy Reid has learned and has shown an ability to do.
And anything from watching this practice that maybe surprised you this spring?
Surprised me. Not particularly. I mean, I think there's the diversity of thought and of usage with regards to certain people in the offense and certain personnel groupings, I think was exciting to see, because that's something I think that the fan base has always been talking about. Oh, how do we get player X in a better situation, or how do we use them like this? And I think Coach Bieniemy showed an ability to say, like, these players are mismatched weapons, and we're going to utilize them in a way that allows us to better our offense and create these mismatches, create these one-on-ones, and dictate to the defense. So I get really excited about some of the usage patterns of some of those guys. And it's something that we thought Scott was going to do his whole tenure here, but he never really showed it. And so to see Coach Bieniemy in his first offseason, his first 9 practices, scratching the surface of that already in a much more dramatic way than Scott ever did, is very exciting for me, because that to me is football in 2023. Like that's what makes Kyle's offense in San Francisco so effective. You have guys that are a little bit unconventional, that can win one-on-one matchups, and finding ways to maximize those relationships to the defense is the thing that makes that offense excellent. And we have some personnel here that can get that done. And I think EB has shown an awareness of that already.
Which players you think will benefit the most from that thinking?
Do I think so? Obviously, just looking at Kansas City as kind of a roadmap, I think a guy that sticks out to me definitively is Logan Thomas, and it's not because he is a one-to-one comparison with Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce is a Hall of Fame player, the best tight end maybe of all time in the NFL. He's very unique in terms of skill set, but I will say there's a lot more crossover in terms of skill set than you would originally think, right? Travis Kelce has the ability to win suddenly, but most of his wins in passing situations are just understanding coverages at a really high level. And Logan does that exceptionally well. So I think that role, and then obviously his relationship to Sam through the OTA period, kind of to me shows, wow, he's ready for a larger role in this offense. Another one, I think that, and really all those tight ends I think are in a good spot, not because of anything they did specifically in OTAs, but because when you look at Kansas City, they find ways to maximize that personnel grouping to dictate to defenses and find one-on-ones with, they had their backup tight end, number 88, was a converted receiver. They find ways, a couple times a game to get him in a one-on-one situation with a linebacker as a receiver. And I think Cole Turner has a skill set similar to that. I think Curtis Hodges has a skill set similar to that. I think Logan Thomas has a skill set that could be utilized in that way. So that group, that position itself just lends itself to those mismatches, and that's the way the position's going around the league. So I can't wait to see if that comes to fruition or not. And also, AG, just because he's got that tremendous ability to be that satellite space player. And in Kansas City, they don't use their running backs, and as these receiving options, but they use them as checkdowns, and they do a great job of finding space for those guys in those checkdown positions and off the screens, and finding a ton of space for McKinnon and Pacheco in that Kansas City offense. And I think AG catching the football in a check down in space is going to be awesome because that's where he excels. I don't want to see him running between the tackles. I want to see him on 2nd and 10, catching a check down and running for 15 in a pseudo screen type of capacity, which I think his skill set really, really lends it to. And Brian Robinson too, he catches the football better than you think. So
now the other thing too is the timing of those checkdowns.
Sure.
How is that going to be different? Because that's something else we talked about. I thought you made some good points, but how is that going to be different, and why could it be more effective with the way they may run it under Bieniemy?
I mean, right now it just seems like it's a bigger point of emphasis. And, I go back to, again, when I watch good offenses, when I watch the Green Bay, when I watch Miami, when I watch San Francisco, one of the ways that you create horizontal displacement of the defense is you have to protect, right? And backs are a big part of protection. But if they're not used in protection, how quickly they can get out and how quickly they can get to their spot, and how quickly we can get out to our spot and not stack the primary read of the route concept. So right. I'm not going to kind of lackadaisically check to the flat or do my check sit over the ball. I'm going to sprint to that responsibility because I know I can affect coverage and I can get the ball with the defense spaced out, or I can attract coverage to me and I can help the concept. I can help the quarterback. So I think that's a huge element. And again, that's an element of good offenses, is because the more eligibles you can get into the route concept, the more opportunities you have to complete the football. So I think the backs are going to be a huge part of that, not necessarily because anything they showed in OTAs and minicamp, but because of how they utilize them in Kansas City.
Right.
And so I think that's a huge element that's going to help this offense if that group can become more efficient in that area.
It also seems like, in talking to some of those backs, that they understand maybe how to fit into the routes better and how where their position impacts how somebody else is. And that should be basic, but that's one of the things they've taught, and that's some of the details too.
Absolutely, man. And that's something that, you have great insight on because you do a great job about talking to these guys. But the backs, like, they play a huge role, and it might seem like a nothing route, but if you're able to move a linebacker because you're running aggressively to the flat, you're able to move that linebacker 3 feet, a yard and a half. That makes a bigger window for the quarterback for that dig coming in behind, or the curl coming in behind, or the out route by the tight end. And so understanding how your timing and your speed to your position and location and depth of that route is going to be huge, because, like, again, it's just making your offense more and more efficient each time you get someone in the right spot in timing, and getting more eligibles out in the concept.
With Sam Howell, because obviously the whole thing here is going to be about his development. What did you see from him this spring? And, I get asked too. And, like, I think one thing I always warn people about is you can't be necessarily just results oriented when you're watching these practices, because you have to know what went into a decision, why a throw was made, why a play was made or not made. And so sometimes you might see a pick, but you just can't assume one thing. You know what you're watching. So what did you see from Howell throughout the spring?
I actually thought, given how well the defense, especially in the back end, was playing, I thought he did a really nice job of getting the ball out on time and on rhythm and into some tight window throws. I think there was this kind of narrative circulating about him that he was not being overly efficient. But when you look at his 3 and 5 step stuff, I thought he was pretty good. Yeah. It got a little bit dicey for me, like when he had to push the ball down the field. You got to read kind of big sweeping safeties, and the safeties and the secondary in general did a great job kind of matching those deeper concepts and putting him in positions where, either I got to force this football or I got to make a big boy decision and check it down or throw it out of bounds. And I felt sometimes he was trying to force that football down the field a little bit too aggressively, which, again, like, Fred Smoot is a big advocate of Sam Howell, and he's like, I'd rather him do that now so he can learn what he can and cannot do. So
I believe in that too.
Yeah. And I think you've mentioned that to me as well. And so I don't really have a problem with that, but it's just about understanding, like, to me, like, the worst kind of thing a quarterback can do is when they're late on the read and they're trying to force the football in some place it shouldn't go. It's one thing to be late and then throw it to somebody who's open because it just took you a minute to get there. It's another thing to be late and then compound your mistake with a ball that shouldn't be thrown. And I felt like he did that a couple times, but it's practice, man. It's part of his growing. And I think overall, I came out of training camp very impressed with him, or mini camp and OTAs, very impressed with him, and his maturity as a player. Like that defense was playing lights out, man. In the back end, they were playing lights out, matching stuff really well. They don't have to negotiate with the run. It's very, very tough sledding. And I thought he just did a great job of feeling himself in the pocket, getting the ball where it's supposed to go. And he had to make some really tough, accurate, tight window throws. And hopefully he can continue to mature in that area. But I think he showed you enough signs. Like, people ask me, like, oh, is he going to be the starter, or is Jacoby going to be the starter? Or does Jacoby deserve more reps? Questions along those lines. And to me, Sam did everything he needed to do to say, yeah, I deserve the first crack at this. And that's all you can do in this period, I think.
Yeah. And it's funny. I'm glad to hear you say it, because like somebody asked me this in a mailbag I did last week, and I had to pretty much, they're like, oh, we hear this. And I'm like, I thought he had a good spring because you saw growth in certain areas. I felt like too in the 7-on-7, I know it's 7-on-7, but the timing and rhythm was really good there, I felt.
Yeah.
And so like that to me eventually carries over. You put the element of the rush in there and all that. It's a little bit different, but I felt like that was a good thing for him. And, I think what you want to see is growth from him.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's important that I have to remind myself constantly with OTAs and minicamp is that the offense is not game planning for the defense.
Right.
And you mentioned that to me. And I think it's really great insight, because like during the blitz period, I'm not repping the blitzes. I'm not trying to defeat the blitzes the way I would an opponent. I'm not trying to develop or install concepts to beat certain coverages, I'm just installing my offense. And I might have some coaching points, some ideas. Hey, on this corner, because they're running this quarters, look, I might need to sit it down here, or whatever the coaching point is. But I'm not like putting in my quarters beater on the day that the defense puts in quarters, because that's not fair to the defense, So he had to do some tough sailing during OTAs and minicamp, especially after like the first 3 or 4 days. And hats off to him. I thought he handled it well. I'm sure he was frustrated at times because that defense, again, they did a great job. But overall, I think he deserves this opportunity. And there's still a lot that needs to happen. There's still that Baltimore practice. There's still training camp. There's still preseason to kind of finalize that assessment. But I think as of right now, he deserves this opportunity.
How will that help him going, like the situation with the blitzes and all that? How, and going against this defense, but the blitzes and having to plan for something, or having to basically on the fly face something you haven't seen. How will that help him down the road?
I think it just kind of, because you're not always going to be right when you're playing quarterback. You're not always going to be like, someone said Tom Brady's superpower. I think Byron Leftwich, he said his superpower was the ability to do the boring thing every single time. And that's really hard. And one of the things that going against a defense that knows what you're doing is it forces you to go to do the boring thing all the time. Like maybe you don't want to check the ball down. Maybe you want to try and force that ball in there. But hey, I need to get a feel for what I can and cannot do. If that window's cloudy, which again, a lot of cloudy windows, again, defense was awesome. A lot of cloudy windows. I got to be mature enough to know I can't make that throw. I got to get the ball to my second read or my third read and live to play another day. And I think that's because that's NFL defense. You're not going to know all the time what the defense was doing. Like we had Matt Ryan on our podcast, the Take Command podcast with Craig Hoffman, and Matt Ryan was like, dude, there's times like where you don't know the picture and you got to trust your initial just kind of glance at the coverage to say, that's too murky for me to make this throw. The ball's got to be out. And I think that takes a certain level of maturity, but you don't get that unless you're challenging yourself. And he was challenged in practice, which I think is good.
Did you come away from the spring more or less optimistic about the offense based on what you saw?
I would say.
Or did it change anything for you?
Yeah, I would say I came out. Anytime you say more optimistic, everyone thinks they're going to be the,
let me just say this in general. How did you come away in general about the offense after the spring?
I was pleasantly surprised. Let me just say that. You got a second-year quarterback. You got a new offense. Was it perfect? No. But was it good? Was it serviceable? Was it like a C+, B-, which is what you're looking for, kind of going against a good defense in the offseason with those variables? I think so. And I'm cautiously optimistic that the offense under Eric Bieniemy can be in a better spot because I saw more diversity. I saw concepts that are going to help the quarterback. I saw, again, just a maturity from a young quarterback that I wasn't expecting. Now, was it perfect? No, but there were some signs that I'm like, I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged about the direction that they're going, and I think the fans should be too. And again, there's still a lot of football, a lot of development this offseason that needs to occur. But in terms of first steps, I think these were very, very positive.
This episode is brought to you by Zillow. You've probably spent hours Zillowing on Zillow, scrolling through beach houses, looking up the Zestimate of your boss's house. But Zillow is so much more than searching for homes. Now, Zillowing means finding a top agent, someone who can answer all your home buying questions, even the ones you're embarrassed to ask. They'll take you on tours, offer expert local advice, and help you get into the home of your dreams, whether it's on a beach or not. Zillow, let's get you home. Download the Zillow app today.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Logan for joining me, and thank you, as always, for tuning in. Don't forget, you can find Logan on the Take Command podcast with Craig Hoffman. You can find that wherever you find your podcasts. He also does work for the Commanders, a lot of stuff with Fred Smoot, Santana Moss, Joey Downson, all that good stuff. So check him out there too. And he's on Instagram. Check him out there. Does a lot of film breakdown. Always worth paying attention to what Logan has to say. Again, I'll be back on Thursday with Logan talking about the Commanders defense. I'll talk to you next time.